Venice has some pretty amazing waterborne transport options, and in today's episode I'm going to explore how realistically we can recreate this within city skylines. I found some very vital bits and pieces on the Steam workshop, which was great. Now the question stands, can I get the citizens in-game to use these ferries to get around, and can I even make these ferries work in these canals that I've made? So let's go find out. I mentioned in the last episode that I was having trouble finding a ferry stop small enough to work in these little wee canals I've made, but thanks to your guys' comments and in particular Jazz, I found this little wee one here from the Monaco series from Pug Gaming, and I think I can make it work here. So let's start with the basics. We'll put down two stops. I want to put one right out front of the train station, and I'll put another one up the Canna Reggio a little bit further, and we'll just see if we can get these working before doing anything else. These ferry stops are placed down, moved into position, and then I use the spawn point mod to move it back to those nearby hidden roads. And at this point here, I wasn't too sure whether the pedestrians were going to use the paths that were already in place or not, but this is all part of the process just to see how these citizens are going to use the ferry stop being away from a road. So all of that same method is applied to the ferry depot, and without this we're not going to get anything spawned. I decided to place this right next to the train station just to make things easy. And I used the ferry depot block service if anyone's wondering. So the next step was to hook up some stops, and this is where I ran into a bit of trouble. They couldn't really find the path. Maybe the canals were too narrow or something of the like, but for whatever reason I tried a few other methods to correct this and none of them really worked. Till I figured out that I really needed to create a ferry path that follows my canals that I've made very, very closely. And essentially this just tells the game that you can add a stop along these routes really easy. Next is to use a couple of mods to get the right vehicle for the line, and I was so thankful to find a Vaporetto on the workshop. This is so cool. These are very unique to Venice. I was seriously crossing my fingers and my toes hoping that this would work. I'm desperate to see these going through the canal, so let's hook it up and wait and see. Yes, I am so stoked. They are nailing their way through the canals at the moment, but I use a couple more mods to adjust the speed and get them moving a little bit more realistically. But this is a big step in the right direction. You will see there is a couple of other things I have to adjust. Unfortunately, some of those really nice bridges I built in the last episode have to be adjusted because the boats are hitting them, but that's cool, I can do that. It's just really exciting to see the canals finally being used. Alright, so the ferry's working. Let's come back to the one right outside of the train station and detail it up. Looking back with hindsight, I was massively jumping the gun here. I mean, I hadn't even had one citizen walk onto the ferry yet and I was already detailing it, but we're going to get to that soon. So what does one of these ferry stops in Venice look like in real life? Well, they've got a platform that's out near the boat with these sort of boarding ramps that come off the side of any nearby embankment, and most of them have a simple shelter over them. Because of the nature of the Monaco ferry stop that I'm using, I have to change it slightly, and I also spend a bit of time making this particular stop out the front of the train station a little bit bigger. Next is to try and get the pedestrian path in here. I want the people boarding the ferry in a very particular way, and I kind of see this as essential because I want to put little ticket machines in and validators and things like that, and that's not going to work if I haven't got full control over where the citizens are walking. I do realise that some citizens have a mind of their own and do crazy things, but I'd like to have the majority of them walk through these detailed areas. So at this point everything's really set. Before I do any detailing with the other stop, I want to make sure people are going to use it, and there's someone boarding it at the moment, but let's give it a little bit of time and just see if it's actually going to work and if the citizens use it properly. So I figured while we wait for that, we'll put a few more buildings down. what a difference a casual couple of thousand buildings chucked down can make. I love the look of the soft glow from the sunset on the buildings, and I've well and truly nailed down my process with putting these buildings down and picking the areas to detail. But now it's time to return to our ferry stop and see how it's going. Well, it's worked alright. We've got everything from doctors to floating disabled people to what looks like homeless people, all waiting to use the ferry. And in terms of the way that they're boarding, it's really fine. It's no problem at all. They're sort of going onto the ferry and back onto the pier without clipping too much, and I can work with that. But there was one movement that the citizens were making that I couldn't fix, and unfortunately it's changed the way that I've had to make the entire stop. And it has to do with the way that the citizens are actually getting onto the pier out on the water. They don't use any of the pedestrian paths that I've placed down, which means I've got no control over them. They actually just walk on an angle, like a really weird angle, straight out onto the pier. I dedicated about 3 or 4 hours to trying to fix this, but I just gave up in the end, and what I decided to do was just detail around it, just make a ramp down at approximately the same angle that they're walking down and just try and make it look realistic. And I'm really disappointed, I'm not gonna lie, because I wanted that full control, and I see this as just a really unfortunate compromise. But I'm also not willing to just let citizens clip right through things to that degree. I think you guys will agree that in the end it actually doesn't look too bad, and because there's so many citizens using it, it sort of validates it somewhat. I would say no, it's not probably that realistic compared to the real life model, but watching the citizens get on and off is pretty mesmerizing because there's so many using it too. So now just quickly, we're going to return over to the port area from the first episode, and now that I've got a ferry line established in the city, I want to put a ferry stop in here right by the harbour. I figured this would be a pretty handy spot for the people that are coming in on the cruise ship. Admittedly, it's only about 90 people on a ship big enough for 2,000, but I'll take anything at this point. And you can see here that it's also on the opposite side of this man-made island from the harbour. So I have a raised pedestrian path connecting both sides of the island. The hope is to get pedestrians walking from the harbour all the way over to the ferry stop and then coming all the way into the city. So I was having much the same problem at the opposite ferry stop as what I was having with the train station one. The citizens choose a really weird angle to walk down on, although I did have some moderate success here with them walking down the pedestrian path, and I figured out that if people were boarding onto the ferry coming down the pedestrian path on the canal edge, they would have no problems. But a lot of them were using the nearby hidden road and walking directly off of that, and that's what was making them come on this weird angle. Again, I tried everything with pedestrian paths and moving the road away and everything, but it just didn't work. And at this point I was a little bit undecided where to go, so I decided to just carry on with the rest of the detailing and check out this nasty lag trying to copy over the procedural object shelter I'd made at the train station. It's really bad, but we get through it. And while I was copying that over, I decided that I was okay with some of the citizens clipping over in this particular ferry stop, only because the clipping's only for a couple of meters through concrete rather than straight up on an angle like over at the train station. Lots of citizens were still using the little pedestrian path that I had set up, so I wanted to keep all that running, and in the end I decided on a bit of a split level here. And I'm pretty happy with this one. I think this comes out really neat. The next thing I want to do is start making these look a little bit more like the real life model. They have particular markings on the outside of the shelter, for instance, that I want to spend some time getting right. Something tells me I may have to adjust the ferry budget, but in any case I've got some really nice shots of the ferry and all the stops we made coming up later on. But next we are going to go over and carry on building some more of that public transport. This part of Venice over here by this big parking garage is actually really vital, and it's going to be vital in our version of it too. And that's for two reasons. The first one is this is going to be the end of the line for our monorail station that shifts all of the passengers that may come off the islands down at the port, whether they've come in by the ferry or they've driven a car or they've come in via the harbour. This is where the end of that line will come to. Number two, we're also going to have the end of our bus route here, and these bus routes are going to run to all of those individual islands down at the port, and I'm also going to try and get one coming from out of town. So this is really going to be the centre hub of all of the transportation really, and I'd expect the foot traffic down here to get really busy as well. There's a couple of really cool bridges I'm looking forward to putting in, but we'll have to wait to a future episode to get to those. So as you can see here in Venice, it's a good combination of all of those unique and historical buildings placed in a very particular fashion, and these areas like this with really modern roads and transportation. And if you guys have followed the series, you'll know that there isn't many places, if any, that we've visited so far that have this sort of a blend. And I've got to say, it is really, really enjoyable. Like, to be able to have all of this functioning as well and the citizens using it, I mean, I just can't wait to see it all come to life properly. And I'm still in utter amazement that after 8 years of playing this game, it just continues to blow my socks off, really. What you can do with this game is unlimited, it literally is. Except if you want people to walk realistically onto a ferry. That's just too much to ask for. So after hooking up all of those public transport lines, it's really cool to see them start moving around. No one's using them at the moment, but that's okay. The buses are doing their loops, the monorail's working, although I do need to visit the workshop and see if I can get a different monorail. I do have upgraded buses, and I have to say I was a little bit intimidated by finishing this off, but it feels good to get this in and get it working, albeit not detailed at the moment. But that's okay, there's plenty of time for that once we nail that functionality down. got some really nice shots of the city, showcasing everything that was built in this episode and so far, and I figured the city was big enough now that I'll put some extended cinematics up. I've tried to include some unique shots. I think I just really enjoy trying to immerse myself into the city as much as I can. But anyway, I hope you guys enjoy the shots. If you found my episode entertaining in any way, I'd appreciate that thumbs up. But in any case, thank you so much for tuning in. As always, I love hearing your guys' feedback, so hit me up in the comments, and I hope to see you on the next episode of Europe in Detail. Catch you later.